Hello, welcome to this video on the big ideas in Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go. So this is just a snapshot of images of the book, and you'll notice that there's no real reference to cloning here. You don't get any sense that this is a science fiction book. You probably get the sense that it's about relationships with the pictures of people. And you also get an image of barrenness and loneliness, these empty spaces or people not really communicating with each other. But the reason I've started with those pictures is to get you to think a little more deeply about what on earth this cloning idea is. So I'm going to claim that this is not a novel about cloning at all. Cloning is just something that happens in it. How is it not about cloning? Well, there's no discussion of the scientific process of cloning. We don't understand the process at all. We're not invited to. There's barely any discussion of the ethics because the clones themselves don't question it, do they? They simply accept their fate, they accept that they're going to be donors, and they accept that they're going to complete, they're going to die. And nobody really voices any opposition in the whole novel until we get really late on towards Miss Emily and Madame. There is simply an acceptance of fate by all the characters. Even the most controlling one, like Ruth, just accepts that she's going to die. In fact, she's the first. She dies really early on her second donation. The only vague discussion related to cloning is whether they have souls and are fully human. And even Miss Emily and Madame appear to believe that they are fully human. But they've given up battling to state this case long ago. So the novel doesn't really engage with this moral issue of whether it would be right to clone people for their body parts. Ishiguro just expects us to think, well, no, it wouldn't be right. But he doesn't really engage in that at all. So what are the clones for? Well, one possibility is that Ishiguro is asking, are our lives, in which we claim to have free will, unlike the clones, really any different from that of the clones? And this is something that all science fiction does. It sets up an alternative reality to get us to look again at our own reality. And the fact that Ishiguro doesn't go into the science or the ethics of cloning really points out that he's interested in our humanity, and this idea of whether we have free will and the importance of relationships. Alfred Hitchcock, the famous film director, had a name for this plot device where you just have something that drives the plot on. In regard to the tune, we have a name in the studio and we call it the MacGuffin. It is the mechanical element that usually crops up in any story. In crook stories, it's always the necklace, and in spy stories, it's always the papers. We just try to be a little more original. So if I think of the clones as a MacGuffin, they're just there in the story to get us to think more closely about what it means to be human and whether we're any different. So the first relationship I'm going to look at is Kathy's relationship with Ruth. Now, everything in Never Let Me Go is symbolic. Everything represents something else. So Hailsham represents society, but it also represents our schools. And I won't delve into that now, but the relationship between Ruth and Kathy represents all our relationships. Let me explain that as we look at this imagery. So Ruth is speaking. Do you want to ride my horse? I was in the midst of playing with 2 or 3 others at that point, but it was clear Ruth was addressing only me. This absolutely delighted me, but I made a show of weighing her up before giving a reply. So Kathy, we immediately discover, is duplicitous. In other words, she presents one face, but has a secret face. She presents herself one way, but actually is quite another. So she appears to be weighing Ruth's offer up, but actually she's incredibly eager to accept it. And this symbolizes how we are desperate for the attention of the powerful. And Ruth is the image of someone who's powerful. Well, what's your horse's name? Ruth came a step closer. My best horse, she said, is Thunder. I can't let you ride on him. He's much too dangerous. But you can ride Bramble as long as you don't use your crop on him. So immediately, this horse is symbolic of Ruth's power. So she calls her own horse Thunder, which is an allusion to how powerful she thinks she is amongst her friendship group. And she is really interested in the idea of how you control power, which is why she's interested in how you can control the horse through the use of the crop. And when she asks Kathy not to use the crop on the horse, she's pretty much telling Kathy, you are not allowed power. I'm clearly the person in charge, and you are subservient to me. And so one question Ishiguro could be asking here is, are all relationships like this, where one person seizes control and the other person accepts that control? That's also symbolized by the name of the horse that Kathy gets to ride. She gets to ride Bramble. So a bramble is a weed, but it's got thorns on it. And so consequently, this is an image of how Ruth is trapping Kathy. She's caught in the bramble, as it were. And the name is obviously subservient to Thunder. You can see that Bramble is a much more gentle sound. It's got the word amble in it, which just means to wander along. And we've got this idea that Kathy is just going to follow Ruth from their very first conversation here. As long as you don't use your crop on him, or, if you like, you could have any of the others. And so Ruth appears to offer choice to Kathy. This is the apparent offer of free will, but it's not really, because Thunder is kept for Ruth. And the effect of it, of course, is that Kathy doesn't choose any of the other horses. She ends up choosing Bramble, as she's told to by Ruth. So Ruth is very much in charge of this relationship. And when we get to the end of the novel and Kathy is ready for death, we find that even Tommy is still talking much more about Ruth than he is about Kathy. So by the end of the novel, we could still argue that Ruth is in control of Kathy's life. And if we just think about Kathy's narration, she introduces this story about the horses like this. But that's not really what I want to talk about just now. What I want to do now is get a few things down about Ruth, about how we met and became friends, about our early days together. So you can see that at the point that she is writing down her story, Ruth is one of the most important characters, if not the most important relationship with Kathy in the book. So Ruth is still powerful and still controlling Kathy's thoughts, even though Ruth is long dead. She's been dead a couple of years by this stage. So perhaps Ishiguro is arguing that we all give up our own free will by giving it away to someone who we feel is more powerful than us. It's a very interesting idea about relationships, isn't it? Are all relationships based on one person seeking power and the other person giving it away? Well, let's take a little further look at what goes on in this imagery. The field was filled with playing children, some a lot bigger than us, but Ruth led the way through them very purposefully. Again, notice the focus on the word led, to show how powerful she is, but also to show that Kathy follows her. Always a pace or two in front. When we were almost at the wire mesh boundary with the garden, she turned and said, "Okay, we'll ride them here. You take Bramble." And now here comes the most important quotation for you to remember, one that will fit any discussion of Ruth and Kathy. So any relationships essay, this is the one to use. I accepted the invisible rein she was holding out. Then we were off, riding up and down the fence. So here we clearly have a metaphor for control. That's the invisible rein, because although it's used on the imaginary horse, it's actually Ruth's control of Kathy. And if we look at the level of symbolism beyond that, if Ishiguro is writing about our own human relationships, again, he's talking about that invisible control that others exert over us, but also that we allow them to have over us. You know, these people like Ruth aren't powerful because they're powerful. They're powerful because we choose to give them that power. And then we've got this imagery of the fence that they're riding up to, which up here is the wire mesh boundary. And these, if you like, are whatever fears we have that control us in society. For example, we might fear poverty, and so we all work. We might fear loneliness, so we all enter into this convention of marriage. We might fear that life has no meaning, so many of us have children. All these things that we do in society appear like free will because we choose to do them, but actually we're doing the same things as everyone else. And therefore, do we really have free will, or are we being controlled? And Ishiguro explores that with this symbolic imagery. So what I've tried to do here is relate the quotations about the characters to their symbolic meaning, and then relate that to Ishiguro's purpose in including them in the novel. And if you follow that, you're automatically on a level 9. Let's double check the mark scheme so you know what I mean. We've been exploratory and talked about what Ishiguro could mean. We've been conceptualized by talking about how the novel isn't really concerned with cloning per se, but with an exploration of humanity and free will. We've used judicious references. We've basically looked at 2 quotations. We've talked about symbolism, which is the writer's methods, and also his terminology. So metaphor, symbolism, that's the subject terminology. We've talked about the effects of that, because we're looking at the effect on the reader and how Ishiguro is trying to get us to think about humanity and ourselves, and all of those are contextual factors. So there you go, right at the top of the mark scheme, simply using 2 quotations.